Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse is a film we can all recognize as helping revolutionize animation with its visual effects, great use of color, dialogue, and of course animating on twos, giving the film those distinct pauses that really add weight to the visuals as a whole. Then the sequel gets announced. I wait a few years and go watch it in theaters. I think it's safe to say my expectations were exceeded. This is an analysis of Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse. The film pacing, at least in my opinion, is pretty well structured. I did find a lot of reviews saying the pacing was too fast, and I disagree. We start with the first 20 minutes focusing on action, spend about 1 hour in New York following the personal lives of Miles and his family, and the other hour getting into the more intense stuff involving interdimensional travel. The movie takes its time to establish character, but also understands that as a superhero film, it has to have epic action sequences, which it presents pretty well. The film starts off with Gwen giving a recap of the first film. There's some nice rhythm and visuals at the start showing Gwen's perspective. There's also some foreshadowing of the film as well as frames from the first film to show Miles' development as a character. But the recap doesn't focus on him for too long since we're getting to understand Gwen. Gwen quits the band she's in after some conflict, and the multi-framing present throughout the film can tell you a lot about what a character is thinking. Gwen is feeling isolated, and so not only is she physically far away but has her own separate frame, further emphasizing her isolation. Gwen talks about feeling alone, and we see her friend Peter. I also like that when they're at the dinner table, May refers to discussion of superheroes as politics, which, I mean, yeah, I guess in a world where shit like this is always happening, there is some political aspect in paying for all the damages. It's nice to see that Peter in all universes seems to have an Aunt May, and an interest in photography, showing cool little tropes of the character. It is also interesting to see his uncle still alive, almost as if his death is what causes him to become Spider-Man in the first place. Peter gets bullied, drinks the serum to become stronger, and then turns into the lizard. Peter dies in the conflict, reveals that he knew who Gwen was and that he wanted to be special just like her. And Gwen's dad, who's a cop, now believes that Spider-Woman is responsible for Peter's death, which is such a great way of adding drama to the film in the first few minutes. Some time passes, and based on Gwen's interactions with her dad, we can actually understand how tough it is for her as her dad continuously tries to arrest Spider-Woman. The color here is utilized very well, with the bright pink overcoming the depressive blue as they embrace. The color differences help show their contrasting personalities, with Gwen's cool blue color returning immediately after her dad leaves. Gwen hears the radio and makes her way to fight her universe's Vulture. The case file is pretty interesting, and the film has a lot more unique still frames, with lots of detail added that you can really appreciate if you pause the film. This Vulture, however, is from a different universe. After seeing his introduction, I already knew the animation in this movie was going to be insane. The Vulture here is portrayed as a polymath Italian artist who really knows about inventions and engineering. There's so much character in this one villain, with numbers and diagrams floating in the air around him as he makes calculations whilst fighting. He uses arrows, bombs, claws, a fire mask with liquid attached to it, a ram helmet to break objects, the spikes on his wings. He has so many amazing tools to fight with, and this is about only 10 minutes into the film. Spider-Man 2099 comes in and the synthwave hits. He tries to explain his backstory, but the fight is interrupted and they continue. We see some of his cool abilities as the both of them fight Vulture. We're then shown Jess Drew, a pregnant Spider-Woman based off of Jessica Drew, who was actually designed to help establish copyright of the name Spider-Woman before a small animation studio got to her. It's in this scene that all three instrumentals associated with each character are combined. Even Vulture's instrumentals are linked by a rising opera. The song is called Guggenheim Assemble, and it's probably my most favorite track in the film. The rise above the museum highlights the Vulture's amazement at all the color, while the slowdown of the music and introduction of drums shows Gwen's concentration. And just like the animation, each minor creative decision adds weight to the action. The way everyone works together is really impressive. But now for the big reveal. George Stacy is about to find out that his daughter is Spider-Woman. The scene is tense, showing his point of view as he turns his head and approaches the scene. During the confrontation, he fires his gun into the air to show he's not messing around. The amount of drama is something really engaging, and the visuals and changing colors during this confrontation establish the internal conflict that George must be feeling. He doesn't know whether to act as a cop or as a father figure. We see a bright visual to reflect his understanding, and a cool blue to highlight his sorrow and coldness as he makes his final decision. After Gwen's father is captured, Just feels sympathetic towards Gwen's situation. She's then offered a bracelet to travel through dimensions, and the opening plays. That's right, somehow only now does the opening decide to play. After a 20-minute packed sequence of emotions and drama is established, I completely forgot this was only the start of the film and not the finale. This is where we get into the visuals shown for Miles are more clean, and the soundtrack more upbeat. After all, he still has his family to be there for him. The film starts off with his parents at the guidance counselor's office as they try to get him a future spot in college. It sets up the conflict for the rest of the film as he has to balance expectations. It's here we also get introduced to the Spot, a sympathetic and awkward villain attempting to rob an ATM. I also like how awkward the fight scene is, as the Spot even apologizes to the guy he's robbing. Shout out to Jason Schwartzman for giving a really humorous voice performance to the character. Also, Miles' introduction as he cooks a beef patty and waits until virtually the entire shop is destroyed was a bit messed up. The Spot introduces himself, and before getting into his backstory, he's interrupted by Miles, who needs to be in the meeting with his parents. We can tell from the fight sequence that he's not as efficient as Gwen, considering all the damage that's caused by the fight. He stumbles and breaks stuff, but we can tell from his distinct fighting style that although he's learning, he's smart enough to adapt. I did kinda wish Aunt May was more present, but hey, she moved to Florida. The fact that Miles and Parker both have to deal with superhero PR is also hilarious. We are then introduced to an internal conflict he feels with telling his parents that he's Spider-Man. He feels lonely in a different way, having friends and family but not having a person to relate to him ever since the events of the first film. Genki also knows that Miles is Spider-Man. Oh yeah, some interesting trivia. In the comics he uses Ned as a nickname. Genki is, however, less involved, probably not wanting to end up as a tragic backstory for Miles. Miles' grades tells us a bit about his personality, getting the highest grades in physics and art. He wants to help contribute to the power of accessing other dimensions, so he can see his friends, and based on his art grades he still keeps his uncle in mind. I found it amusing how they play on the struggling immigrant trope by having the counselor use their identities as a sub-story. It kind of shows how you don't need a down-on-the-luck character to make them compelling. Miles wants to study in Princeton, worrying his parents that he's growing apart from them. Miles has to leave after noticing the Spot wreak havoc, and his dad also has to leave after a supervillain alert is given to him, resulting in the three of them ending up at Alchemax, where the original collider of the first film was. Spot's backstory is really impressive to look at, only using black and white for visuals, a distinct difference from the colourful world, making us pay close attention. There's also a lot of foreshadowing here, such as Miles Morales from Earth 42 sitting in front of the spider that was supposed to bite him. Oh yeah, the Spot also gets hit by a bagel, which has become a really popular meme. On another note, the writers of the film are friends with the directors of Everything Everywhere All at Once, which also contains a bagel present within the villain's backstory. story. Just an interesting thought. The scene with Miles and his dad is a good way to show the lack of communication between them, considering only one knows the true identity of the other. There's almost a sense of distance as they try their best to understand one another. The composition of the moving roofs with sunlight coming through them really makes the entire area feel relaxed, giving the conversation a moment of peace inside the chaos of New York. Spot gets trapped in some sort of portal hub where he has access to other dimensions. He visits a dimension in an old comic style, a Lego dimension, and the dimension that Venom takes place in, where he commits the worst crime of all, stealing gum. The Lego scene, by the way, was animated by a 14-year-old after the producers of the film became very impressed by his Lego version of the film trailer. Really makes you think about what you're doing with your own life. Jefferson is about to get promoted to police chief within a week and celebrates the news with family and friends. His speech is quite moving, talking about how he and Aaron were raised and how they would both cause trouble, only for him to end up as a police officer who protects people. Miles is getting a cake for them and isn't there for his speech. Also, this kid and the figure behind him both smile in a really creepy way. Jefferson gives a toast to Aaron, his wife, and to his son, only to realize he isn't there, and it's quite a heartbreaking moment for all the characters involved. We know his parents are deeply disappointed, but we also know that Miles is trying his best. The way the camera is stationed when he says "I love you, Miles," staring directly at the viewer, adds further emotion to the scene, as you can see him imagining his son being there with him. There's a confrontation as his mother explains the opportunities that Miles has. We also, however, understand his perspective, considering he wants to attend the top physics university and be New York's hero. He is trying to achieve as much as he can. He leaves after a fight, and this is where Gwen comes in. We think this is going to be an emotional moment, but the rush awkwardness along with the soundtrack hints that something is on Gwen's mind. They both leave and begin bonding as they traverse New York. The sentence, "maybe some things are supposed to be just for us," reflects a viewpoint of the world that only they can see, and we're shown a really amazing shot where the entirety of New York appears upside down. We see the relationship advance after they begin opening up to each other. They then have a conversation where Miles tries to join Gwen's elite dimensional team, only to be rejected. His parents walk in, and you can tell from the pained expressions that the entire interaction is fairly awkward. Gwen has to leave, and Miles' mother helps console him. There's a reason why this is the established interaction before the second half of the film. She expresses concern with her son finally growing up and becoming an adult. She worries that everyone out in the world won't look out for him, and how he must remember who he is and where he belongs. A message which will resonate with him for the rest of the film. She then allows him to visit Gwen. They both investigate the area where the spot was. The apartment has a lot of minor details with the spider from Earth 42 and Jonathan On's picture. There's also a spider from Earth 14512 or Penny's universe. There's some other numbers from other universes like Spider-Man 19925. And if you want to search that one up, then be my guest. Anyways, Gwen and Miles finds out that the Spot escaped by obtaining more holes. Jess is pissed and everyone goes to find him on Earth 50101. Miles follows Gwen even though he's not supposed to. This is a really engaging shot, reminding the viewer of a further isolation between both characters, as they're framed together with the two holes behind them. After Miles enters Moonbatten, we're overwhelmed by the colors, sounds, and the sheer size of the landscape, and it's here where we enter the second part of the film. Miles and Gwen fight with the Spot, and we see a different shift in power. The Spot has much more wittier dialogue against them, and he's learned to adapt his fighting technique. Again, the framing composition in this film is on point. Pavitra's character is portrayed really well with a lot of confidence and charisma to highlight the energetic nature of the character. The editing here is hilarious, and the film kind of makes fun of the rushed backstory trope, packing the short scene with lots of dialogue. Hobie here shows up, and his whole art style is completely mesmerizing to look at, with newspaper and magazine clippings covering him and changing with every action. It took about 3 years to animate him, which is insane. I've come to realize from his interactions with all the other characters that each of them have a strong distinctive personality. From Hobie's universe, Norman somehow becomes president. Also, cops are portrayed as pigs. Jesus, I'm actually glad this film doesn't hold off with its creative freedom, even mentioning fascism briefly. I get that a lot of other Spider-Man films focus on serious and sometimes graphic issues, but adding stuff like this, when you know foreign markets aren't going to approve of it, makes the film feel that much more authentic. The Spot looks and acts so menacingly here. Considering how powerful he isn't playing around. The vision here is amazing, where both characters are shown face to face with each other. The gravity of the situation really hits about here with the muted sounds and dizzying point of view. The entire action sequence here kind of blew me away. I saw the Alchemax building start to fall and was like, yeah, there's no way they're going to save everyone. The way they all distinctly spin their own webs to move around and save people further makes each character unique. Also, why does Inspector Singh try and comfort the child? If they're about to die from falling rubble, just pick her up and run. Anyway, Gwen stopping Miles from saving Singh is quite messed up, because we understand what a canon event is after it's mentioned in this segment. A giant hole appears and characters proceed to travel back to base. I think the comic books, which act as anchor points for segments of the story, feel really interesting as they clutter up the screen. We see the backgrounds of some of the characters who helped influence Miles throughout both films, and we see from the vast amounts of imagery shown just how convoluted the situation is, and how characters intertwine with each other. Nueva York is one of the most brilliantly designed parts of the movie. The way all the characters move and make the film look so alive is really cool. So many references and character designs in this part of the film. I can only imagine how crazy the animators were going while making this, and rewatching the film each time has made me appreciate the visuals that much more. There's a Peter parked car. There are so many details, and some really unique character designs only appear for about a second. I'm also very interested to know how Gwen and Hobie managed to catch Donald Glover, Prowler. There is some interesting interaction here with a character called Spiderbite. It's also funny that, like a VR avatar, she needs to use teleport mechanics to move around. Miguel's introduction becomes more menacing with Oscar Isaac's voice performance. We see how different he is from everyone else, having to continuously inject some sort of serum to keep his powers. His face upon seeing his daughter isn't even one of anger, it's one of deep exhaustion and sorrow. Peter Parker appears, and I was pretty excited to see him. Although he doesn't get much screen time in the film, seeing him finally have a good relationship with MJ and even having a kid is pretty wholesome. The sentence, "You're the only Spider-Man who isn't funny," further reflects how different Miguel is from all the other Spider-Men. Another one of my favorite scenes is when we start seeing how all other webs begin connecting. It's here that we really start to see how fate plays into this film. How Miguel explains it is that in almost every Spiderverse, shared events will occur that are a part of every story, aka canon events. ASM 90 is one of the events that takes place in which a police captain dies saving a kid, the canon event that Miles disrupted. There's a good shot here where each character looks at their own comics, and it makes you wonder how this affects their ideas of destiny. Here the scene is quite heartbreaking when Miguel explains how his decision to replace another version of himself in order to be happy resulted in the death of his daughter and an entire world. In the vision we revisit, there are actually corpses surrounding the city streets for a split second, showing the potential for destruction. Miles Miles' father, according to calculations, is due to die in 2 days. Gwen understands that her father is also captain, but she has an expression of acceptance, understanding that her father's death needs to happen, a more disturbing side to her character as a whole. The slow accumulation of other Spider-Men as the intensity of the scene elevates also tells you something is about to go down. Hobie helps Miles break the shield surrounding him. I like how the camera doesn't linger for too long, he just straight up runs. Holy shit, the fight sequence, man. Seeing this in theaters was crazy. There's so much going on, so many character designs and so much action. Some of my favorite details include Mayday using her web slinger to take a selfie, and when the other Spider-Man begin booing Miles, the villains cheer him on, and the fact that as part of training, a Spider-Man can pull 2 heavy objects towards him, like what ends up happening in most of the films. The way the characters move across this giant building is full of action. The characters really stand out against the background of the scenery, and this look of betrayal is incredibly strong. Although Peter Parker in this film is used as mostly comedic relief, his big speech about having a child because he wanted it to end up like Miles is pretty touching. It shows the impact they both had on each other from the first film, and how much they affected each other's lives. When he's defeated, Miles even uses the same method of capture as in the first film before another major action sequence happens. This segment of the highway with its neon lights enhances the confrontation the characters are about to have. Miguel saying "stop pretending you know where you're going" isn't literal, it's part of what makes up the entire theme of the film as Miles tries to figure out not only what he wants to do in life, but also how he intends on moving towards a plan, keeping his family and his responsibilities on the same level of priority. We feel an amazing sense of isolation through the sounds of the song and the emphasis on the character's dialogue. This movie's soundtrack is one of my favorite parts of the film. Miles learns that the spider teleported from Dimension 42 prevented the Spider-Man in that world from existing, and had it not been for Miles, the original Spider-Man would have lived. After one last confrontation, Miles finally decides he's going to take control of his own destiny, using his powers to knock Miguel back before heading back to the base. Also pretty smart of him to have lured everyone away, meaning he did have some sort of plan by moving far away. It's kind of weird how despite coming by to supposedly help Miles out, Gwen and everyone else seems to only watch on rather than interfering with Miguel's plans. It's a further discussion on the idea of fate present throughout the film, and whether one should try to change it or helplessly accept it. The whole sequence after, when Gwen gets sent back before saying "we're supposed to be the good guys," manages to make Jess have a moment of doubt and hesitation present within her face as her whole color changes to a cool blue. There's a much more washed out color aesthetic from Gwen's confrontation with her father, no life to it, showing the growing disconnection between them. As they begin interacting, more light slowly begins to return. The abstract visuals as they both try and make sense of it all, and the realization that Gwen's dad won't be captain, gives the audience hope that perhaps Gwen's father will live, and that she can control her fate. The surreal visuals during Miles' scene are really impactful and bring to light what he's thinking about. There's a final confession scene from Miles to his mother reflecting his true thoughts and what he's learned. Turns out Miles' mother doesn't know who Spider-Man is, and instead of climbing on the walls to show her his powers, he kinda just lets the awkwardness play out. This is where the music kicks in, and we realize when Gwen walks in that Miles is in a different universe. Uncle Aaron comes back and the scene is really unnerving. We know from the first film that Miles was supposed to be the Prowler. The scene that plays afterwards shows the aftermath of a city without Spider-Man's existence. There's some cool details like a sign that references Scorpion and Sandman, implying that they started their own corporations to take over New York. Miles gets knocked out by a different version of himself, and the shot where Aaron receives a text is full of dread as he realizes the Miles he's speaking to isn't him. The scene where Gwen walks in to talk to Miles' parents is pretty awkward, but there's finally some hope in her taking action and defending Miles after all this time. She understands that she's needed in order to comfort Miles's parents, and so that's what she does. It's difficult to say what Jess is thinking when she lets the situation play out. We don't know whether she's looking at it from an understanding point of view and a changed heart, or whether she's just eager to find out where Miles is located. Miles, while strapped, attempts to convince his uncle that he can do good, another indicator of the choice versus fate theme present in the film. Unfortunately, Aaron is so far gone, we know that it is impossible for him to change through this brief interaction. There's a lot of impact during the punch scene as well, with the impact of the sound and colors really hitting you in the face. The spot returns to cause chaos in the city, and Gwen gathers a team that consists of the characters from the original film. We also see that Miles has a thought out plan of escaping. I've given most of my opinions and thoughts throughout the film, trying to know anything I find interesting in chronological order. What I think we should consider is how this film differs from the previous one. The first film was about working together with those close to you in order to find out who you are. In this film, there's a lot more disconnect and isolation between characters, resulting in the relationships being quite strained. The theme in this film is more philosophical and abstract, focusing on ideas of fate and how much control one has over their own life. Throughout the film, Miles focuses entirely on the expectations set upon him, similar to the first film, but the sequel focuses on more long-term expectations and what he chooses to do with his life as we take more personal perspectives of each character. Was the ending abrupt, like a lot of people are saying? Well, I did think that Gwen's plan felt a little packed in at the end, and the short amount of dialogue interaction we have between the two Miles was quick. Do take into account that this film is considered one of the longest animated films to be created. I couldn't imagine how much more they could have packed during the end scene, but I am grateful they wrapped up the story around this segment. Before the video ends, I'd like to give a huge shout out to the animators who worked on the credits. This is one of those rare instances where I actually stayed in the theater to the very end, credits included. Otherwise, if you've made it this far, then subscribe for more videos and have a good week.